Welcome to Accreditation Conversations. I'm your host, Amy Dykins from Weave, and today I'll be speaking to Dr. Gianina Baker. Gianina is the acting director at the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, NILOA, where she provides leadership and directs research specific to the assessment of student learning at colleges and universities. Additionally, Dr. Baker serves as the Associate Director of Evaluation, Learning, and Equitable Assessment at the Office of Community College Research and Leadership. In this role, she supports the work by doing consulting, she does public engagements, she also leads their research agenda. Her research interests include student learning outcomes assessment at minority-serving institutions, access and equity issues for underrepresented administrators and students, assessment in athletics, and higher education policy. Dr. Baker holds a PhD in Educational Organization and Leadership with a higher education concentration from the University of Illinois, a master's in Human Development and Counseling from St. Louis University, and a BA in Psychology from Illinois Wesleyan University. Prior to this position, she was the Director of Institutional Effectiveness and Planning at Richland Community College. Let's get started. Welcome to Accreditation Conversations. I'm your host, Amy Dykins from Weave, and today I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Gianina Baker. Dr. Baker and I were introduced several years ago by a mutual colleague, Dr. Ray Van Dyke. Ray, many of you probably know, was somebody who was a colleague here at Weave and actually was the founder of the Weave Academy. Before that, he was at Virginia Tech. And so a longtime scholar in the assessment world as well. And I always appreciated not only Ray, but the introductions that he made, like you, Dr. Baker. So thank you for being here. So many folks have on campuses out there, folks who are listening today have benefited from the work that you have done and colleagues have done at NILOA, the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. And the work that you continue to do today focused on community colleges. So thank you for being here. I would kind of like to start a conversation just to make sure everybody really knows what is NILOA and what is the work that you focus on there.
Well, thank you for having me. I am excited to join you this morning and talk. And Ray, wherever you are, you're missed. It was always a pleasure seeing his face and talking with them. Very much committed to assessment. And that's where we sit. We were founded in 2008 by the former president of the University of Illinois, Dr. Steve Eikenberry, along with Dr. George Koo, who is just, he definitely has done a really good job advancing not just higher education in terms of cultures of higher ed and student affairs and student engagement, but really has left a mark on the assessment world as well. And so they founded NILOA, and if you ever get to hear them talk about it, you know, it really became a result of the Spellings Commission report that said that students weren't learning on college campuses. And both of them, not only in their roles, but in the scholarly work that they did, knew that that was not the case and knew that college really did work to transform students. And so they wanted to make sure that there was a place, that go-to place, that not just put and gathered information, assessment information that had been developed over the years, but also really tried to think about, you know, what's next in the field and what's next that people are talking about and what research could be pulled together to look at the landscape of assessment as we see it today. And then, you know, where are some gaps in some of that work and how can we work really to document and disseminate such good use of assessment of student learning evidence around the country. And so that's NILOA as you see it today. The website looks a little different than it did before. Over the years, we've learned how to make it a bit more user-friendly and really target the information that you're seeking, because we realize that, you know, you might get stuck down a rabbit hole of information going from one to the next. And so by really curating the information that we had on the site since 2008 and collecting and engaging many of the assessment experts across the country and writing occasional papers or viewpoints or assessment and practices, we were really able to develop this website that I hope will be a resource for many for years to come. You know, as you're new to assessment and trying to figure out what even are we talking about, to those more advanced in this space and thinking about, again, how are we bridging co-curricular and curricular affairs, student affairs, and how are we thinking about comprehensive learner records, and how can we work to really think about evidence and validating that evidence. And so NILOA has become, I think, and I hope, really that go-to place, not just for people who know about us, but for those of you who may have not heard of us yet, and this is your first experience with us. And so we hope that you'll engage in the website, see some of the work that has transpired over the years, maybe even read our NILOA at 10. We had both George and Stan write at the 10-year mark, where NILOA is gone, where NILOA is going in terms of assessment. And so it's been a nice kind of timeline of activity and space and conversations. And so we're excited that the conversations continue, because assessment's a great topic.
Excellent. Yeah. And that's so interesting. I haven't actually heard that kind of summary of how you got started. And I'll share a couple of things that came to mind there. One is that so much of the work that I'm involved in around accreditation and working with accreditors, it also had its kind of impetus around that quality assurance thinking that came out of spellings. And so it's interesting to hear, the approach that others took to kind of address that. We know that higher education is transforming student lives. We need to learn how to show evidence of it. We need to, improve all the time. But so it's interesting to hear that some of the origin stories kind of were prompted similarly. But I also, my research interest in my doctoral work was around high impact educational practices. So very familiar with Dr. Ku's work in that area. So another huge influence kind of in tandem to the work around assessment and accreditation, just thinking about how students learn and those kind of things. And so I love to hear all the time, like a rock star in my scholarly world, right? It turns out also influenced NILOA, which has touched so many other folks as well. Very nice.
And what I appreciate the most is, and I'm sure this will come up in parts of the conversation, was this reflection of things that had been done before. For instance, Pat Hutchings was very much one of our NILOA senior scholars and has been with NILOA since the beginning. Talked and continues to push on that, the principles that the American Association for Higher Education Assessment put together back in 1992 around principles of good practice. And so what I appreciated about NILOA and the work is that it continues to build from that, and telling people, like, this isn't, we're just not, creating this from anywhere. This has a base and has a foundation of work from years of people thinking and talking about it. And so let's bring it all in one space and let's see, where we go next.
Excellent. A continued scholarly vein of inquiry and that dialogue that continues to evolve over time. And I think we will talk a little bit more about that as well. I know that most recently the work that has been produced at NILOA has been releasing a new book. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about, what it is that you've been working on there, why it's important, and who really the audience is intended for this.
It was such an exciting time. I think we were, the other editors and I were super excited to finally let you all into what we've been reading and learning about over these past, it's been definitely a few years. NILOA started, we will say that we started a national conversation around that relationship between equity and assessment with an occasional paper that was written by Drs. Eric Montenegro, one of our grad student research analysts at the time, who became our communications director and is now doing great things, along with Dr. Natasha Jankowski, our former director of NILOA. And they really started to think about, what's this relationship look like? What is culturally responsive assessment? It could be pulled from the heavy research base around culturally responsive evaluation and help us think about what culturally responsive assessment is. And what does it mean to be culturally responsive in this space? And so in that first occasional paper, you'll see just concepts kind of, put together in a way and saying like, let's start this conversation. And so after that, we had quite a few people, faculty, assessment people, others, international scholars, help us think through, once they read the paper, what's your response to it? And so on our website, you'll also find, which is www.learningoutcomesassessment.org, you'll find the responses from, we have 20 plus, right? Thinking about inclusive pedagogy or thinking about what professional development means in this space. One of my favorites is a couple of authors writing about crib theory and what that means in relation to assessment. If you don't know what that is, go check it out, because they all were able to bring their different perspectives in with these concepts and then push into another space. And taking that information, we put together some case studies from institutions that were like, we think we're doing this work and here's how. And they wrote that up. And we were able to publish those. So taking the responses, the conversations we were having out at conferences, the case studies themselves. There was a second occasional paper that came about. And this one really pushed on equity-minded assessment and what that means, using Dr. Estella Ben-Simone's equity-mindedness and pushing, again, on those concepts that were developed in that earlier paper, and having others develop an actual framework that we could respond to from these earlier conversations were, I think, exciting for us, enough that we just had so much great data and information that we were like, let's think about a book, right? That at least captured at that time, how we can really make a case for assessment of student learning as a vehicle for equity, specifically in higher education. And so we in the book itself, we talk about the why, the what, the how, and then we like to talk about the now what as a part of the where should you go and where are people going next in this conversation. And so I hope that wherever you sit at your institution, there's a space that this book helps you think about. The title of it is Reframing Assessment to Center Equity, Theories, Models, and Practices. And my co-editors include Gavin Henning, who's amazing and really pushing the space of assessment over in New England area and, of course, nationally. And then we have Ann Lundquist, who formerly of Anthology and now at the Hope Center has really been pushing us to think about different spaces that she's worked in those different positions. And of course, Natasha and Eric had to really join us and push, as they've been really leading the conversation for a while. And so what you'll find is not just practical approaches, but us really trying to explore theories and models that are out there around equitable assessment. Those that are really trying to center equity, whether it's in student affairs, right? Thinking about STEM, pushing into community colleges more specifically, looking at our HBCUs, our historically Black colleges and universities, and the leadership role that they often play there, as well as one of our favorite chapters is thinking about how we think about the role of technology-enabled assessment as a possible tool for equitable assessment. And so many spaces that people come to in this work and thinking about how they might center equity through their perspectives, through their roles. It's a natural, I think, evolution of where the work was at the time. And so now we're trying to figure out with, what we do with now the information that we got back from this book, or that we couldn't fit into the book, of what's next. But so many good conversations that have been started and continued. And I don't think you can go to a conference without seeing something titled around equity and assessment. So we're excited to have had a role in that.
Yeah, excellent. And I think you're exactly right. We've seen leadership from you guys long before this was maybe on the national stage. around this conversation, that it was percolating, as you said, some of the occasional papers, but what excellent resources to offer to folks as this has become something, thankfully, on the forefront of folks' minds on campuses. And I have spoken to colleagues out there. We like to talk about it. They're out there in the trenches doing this work on a daily basis, but sometimes struggling with the I see the opportunity, I see the needs, but I'm not sure exactly the what to do, or like, are other people being successful somewhere that maybe I could learn from? And I know that you guys at NILOA have always done a really nice job of kind of taking the collective voice and distilling it down to something that's actionable for folks on campus. And I think this is another really great example. Like you said, we don't have all the answers yet for sure. Lots of still what next kind of questions, but such an important topic to engage in very actively, not to shy away from, and that you're starting to offer some solutions to folks. You're starting to offer at least some insights into what other folks are trying that may be successful for us in these areas. And so kudos to you guys for tackling a difficult topic and an unexplored in many ways topic that folks really need those resources around. So very, very excited to see where this continues to go for folks. I am going to ask you a little bit of a clarifying question, and not trying to give away all the information because there's so much there. But can you say a little bit more about, if I'm out there on campus and I'm thinking about my role as an assessment leader, or a faculty who's involved in assessment, things like that, and how I can utilize my role in my leadership to impact equity? Can you say just a little bit more about that for us?
Absolutely. I think that is maybe the first step, right? And knowing that you can impact your students, your college. That's a lot of the work, honestly. If you can't see that, it's kind of hard to think about what barriers you might remove for students as you continue through this work. And so, a lot of, I think, the conversations really start with where you sit. In fact, there's a chapter in the book on intercultural competence and thinking about what that is, and how important it is for that realization to happen, that awareness to happen. And so as we are having these conversations, I think we often are talking with different people in their roles, trying to figure out how can I center equity. And while I think that some of the examples in the book are absolutely great, it really does depend on your context. It really does depend on your students and their needs. It is all very dependent on some of those pieces that we may not even know about. And so we offer them up definitely as examples, not just to, I think, one, to show people the work can be done. And two, here are some different ideas of how people have tackled it. But one, if you go back, many of them are able to talk about, their own experience with it, their own perspective, and how they were able to not only do the work, but see themselves in the work themselves. And then two, really think about how they're working to center students, center equity. They're very mindful of the barriers. They're mindful of, things like language and tools that are appropriate for their students. And so I hope that at least if you're looking at it, there's that thread in all of those stories and all of the case studies that we've put together, because I think that there's a case to be made. And there's some really good books that are out there, right? If you're looking to think through from Equity Walk to Equity Talk, a few of the scholars from AAC&U, the Association, I'm going to say this wrong. Let me pause here because they just changed their name. And if I say it wrong, they're going to kill me. There's a really good book that was written by a few scholars from AAC&U and the American Association for Colleges and Universities. And within that book really talks about, we've done a lot over these past few years, really just learning about what it means to be equity minded, or what it means to center equity. And now it's time to do. And what does that look like? And how can you play a role in that? I think the first step, just acknowledging the role that you can play, is important. Seeing all of the different ways that this can play out on different campuses, affecting different students and what their needs are, is important for you to then figure out what's next. And of course, surrounding yourself with people who also are really trying to push to center equity is important as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for saying a little bit more. I think that's really helpful. And I appreciate the thinking, the modeling of it doesn't have to be a solution today. Really, the first step is just acknowledging and saying that this is important and I want to be a part of it. And now what? Right? Like that you can start someplace, and really it starts just with you being willing to engage. And so thank you very much for that. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit. This is accreditation conversations after all. And assessment and accreditation has a long and storied, for better or worse, kind of relationship, right? And over the years, we have seen accreditors really shine the light on assessment. Again, I say for better for worse, because we know that having the carrot or the stick, sometimes those are both good and bad things. We could become compliance mandate kind of discipline that those of us who have been engaged in really authentic assessment of student learning outcomes, and have seen transformation that can occur on college campuses as a result of really great assessment work. Then you look back at accreditation and you're like, well, we owe the accreditors a lot, right? They said, you must do this. And so then folks started to pay attention to it in a really valid way. But it also then created this we have to do this because the accreditor said, as opposed to something that emerged more organically. I would love to hear from you a little bit about that historical perspective. But also, I know you and I have had a chance to talk a little bit about the industry, both around accreditation thinking and assessment, but also assessment practice on campuses in general maturing somewhat. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about that as well.
I think we are in a phase of disruption, right? I think that we talk all the time about, at least internally and with um, a couple of authors I've worked with, Dr. Divya Beda of ExamSoft, as well as Natasha Jankowski, our former director, and put together a survey to look at what's been happening around, specific to assessment in the midst of the pandemic, and as we're hopefully moving toward a post-pandemic phase. And so in this period of disruption, we've seen so much, and we've tried to, even accreditors are like, what, I'm sure, what can we expect from our institutions in all of this when people aren't even on campus, right? We can't do our surveys in the same ways. You probably can't gather evidence in the same ways. And so this, I think, is a great time, in that we get a chance to review our processes, our practices, and see what works for us and why, and talk about all of these things. I think, when we were talking about that, that it's more, at least a more mature accreditation system, and their criteria are much more in that space. I think, we have so much more that we can rely on, or could go back to. And so that potentially helps us in that it's not brand new. We're not all sitting here saying, what should we do? In fact, when we surveyed people at the early stages of the pandemic, many of them said, right, we're returning to assessment basics. And that we had assessment basics had shown, the growth of where we had been to where we are. And when they said that, right, formative assessment really came top of mind. How can we really start to know about what students know and can do early, and continue to intermittently ask instead of, at the very beginning and maybe at the very end. And so as we were listening to institutions think about this, right, and have a conversation around assessment practices, it was heartwarming in a way, in that we've moved, I think, from this stage of, the assessment's going away, we don't really need it, to it's here and it actually helped us through the pandemic in a way that we will probably acknowledge later, not necessarily right now, but we had some tools and we had some great people in the field really helping us think about what's next, right? It wasn't just us holding community check-ins like, are you guys okay? Are you all okay? Are you ready to, what are you doing around assessment? What are some needs? We had some webinars where we thought about curriculum mapping and assignment design, doing that virtually because people weren't in the space. Tell us what you need. We'll try and help provide some tools to help you get through it. There were others. Many of the accreditors were also helping people, get through what the next steps were as they had site visits coming up, as they had self-studies due. And so within those conversations, and as we sit now, we have a chance to hopefully reflect, because we're not going to go back, we're moving forward. I do think there's evidence of not only mature assessment processes for institutions, but also for accreditation. And so I think moving forward, I hope that we are able to build off of that and really grow not just the discipline of assessment, but also the scholarship, because we have learned a lot together.
Excellent. So I always like to ask my guests this question, which is a hard one, right? I get it. It's not an easy thing to say, but when we think about that role that the accreditors played in that early kind of, this is a best practice that is expected kind of conversation that helped us along the way establish assessment basics that then are something that folks can fall back on. At the very least, this is the bare minimum, and it's easy in a way for us to do because it's the basics. It's no longer the what even is this thing. Where is that area that you would like to see accreditors start to focus on next, right? Accreditation standards and criteria are always evolving. Where should accreditors be thinking as they go forward from where you sit?
It's a good question. And I'm sure we all take different perspectives on this, and that I'm sure together would really help accreditors think about that. In terms of quality assurance, what I would potentially see would be something that we talked about, was embedding those that have knowledge of assessment into their staff. Because within, as you said, they're often the ones who write the criteria, or at least, help get people together to help think about how the criteria should evolve. And I think, some of the most promising practices is around making sure that they have staff on board who not only understand assessment, but have done it potentially at an institution, and can work to help people at different institutional types, with different types of resistance, different drivers around assessment, because I think that knowledge really does help just push the thinking and the resources that are needed to help at least meet their criteria, and who knows, push forward in that work. I'm starting to see more of it, because I think the criteria aren't going to necessarily evolve that much, that differently. And so helping people understand what the criteria mean, right? Helping them understand that this is, while it feels punitive, it's not. It's actually helping you understand more about your students, and here are some of the tools and resources that would help. It could be a very, I think, empowering conversation if we could really start to push, I think, on some of that. But I would say embedding staff. that have knowledge and expertise.
Excellent. It's very interesting that you say that, because when you think about the accreditor organizations, the staff, they are very frequently at the front lines with folks, helping them, like you said, interpret the standards and understand the expectations. So now, taking it to that next step and saying, well, the folks who are helping interpret the expectations really need to have a very deep knowledge of what those expectations are and perhaps how you meet them. Excellent. I love this recommendation. So thank you for sharing that, with the wider audience. As we continue to look forward, I hope that we'll see some of the recommendations that folks are sharing as a part of their episodes. That we have accreditors out there that are listening as well. And we want them to have the opportunity to learn from the space too, right? And that's how we can do it, is if we open these dialogues and continue to kind of share, like, this is what we're seeing on our end. We want you guys to think about this for us holistically, not one particular accreditor, but like really as a movement in quality assurance. Accreditors need to be listening. And they are. They ask me those questions as well. So we're going to think a little bit now about something that I'm really excited about coming up, which is the Assessment Institute. And so I'd like to hear a little bit from you about what we should be looking forward to at the Assessment Institute, what the theme for this year is. And we'll be releasing this episode as a precursor to sponsoring the Assessment Institute. So I'm looking forward to being a part of it again this year.
I too am excited because this is the first year that, well, I didn't say first, but we're coming back to
what we're all excited about that, right? It's in person.
It's weird in that the past couple of years have been online, and they did a really good job. I don't know how you coordinate all of that, but it was absolutely amazing in how, you had over 200 plus presentations, and trying to get them all online, and people in spaces and recordings. I am glad that we're back in person, and that, we definitely have missed the networking that happens, the just seeing each other and making sure that people are okay in person as opposed to online. And so within that space, NILOA has served as a signature partner for a few years now, thinking about what's next, how to as we just talked about with the book, right? The what's next part often is what's asked. And so we've been grateful that partnership has continued, and that the Assessment Institute continues to help us, or at least allow us into some of those conversations and spaces. And so within that, we have a great arrangement with them, in that we have a track that's sponsored with them. And so the first few years, we've been doing a track for a while. Definitely was trying to bring in other conversations that were happening outside of assessment, but we're very much connected to learning. And so we hope that early on, people were able to make those connections. And if not, we're here to tell you about what that was. And so as the years have gone on, we've actually tried to work, as the tracks have proliferated, tried to embed NILOA work into the tracks. And so that definitely is the case this year. We don't have a full track in the way that we have them before, but we have tried to embed in some other spaces. And so we will still have our keynote presentation, and I'm excited because we usually try and use that to say, what work is kicking off in the next year, try to get feedback from people. It's a great space to do that in. And so we're actually I'm going to be with Drs. Beta and Jankowski to talk through the survey, the one that was just released back in March of this year, about thinking about the pandemic and assessment. And so there have been a few presentations on it, but us all together at the Institute,
in person,
I think sounds great. In person, come join us. And that'll be a great way to kick off our track. And many of the sessions, I think all of our sessions are actually on Tuesday. And so we continue to push on the notions of what next. And so there will be a couple presentations around equity and assessment from some of the editors of the book, pushing on thinking about a couple of co-authors and I have been trying to think about these 5 faces of assessment, is what we're calling it. Come to the conversation if you're interested. Dr. Cindy Cogswell and Dr. Marjorie Dorme Williams are my co-authors in that. We've been pushing that work quite a bit. And it really just, again, trying to think about what are some good assessment practices we're seeing in community colleges, where we continually get that conversation in question, right? Our materials on our website are, they should and hopefully do address the range of institutional types. But oftentimes, even in the Assessment Institute presentations, we always get asked the question at the end, what about community colleges? And so it's a session. There's still a whole track dedicated to community colleges, but I definitely want to share, not only what NILOA has learned, but I also have a role with the Office of Community College Research and Leadership. And so we've done a lot of work with community colleges thinking about equitable assessment practice and other pieces. And so excited to bring all of that kind of together in a different way. So please come and join us. We're excited. There are over, I think, this year, 300 presentations, so much that I think they had to actually turn some people away. But it's super exciting in that people are excited and energized to get back together. And I think that the discipline of assessment benefits when we all are able to do that. And I was going to say, as for the theme, I don't know that I know the theme. There has to be a theme.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure there is. Well, I'll be surprised when we get there. So I was going to say, and I think one of the things that I have always appreciated, and you said this a couple of different ways, is that this is a chance for us to get together with other like-minded folks that are thinking about these things really hard, not just from a practical perspective on your campus, but also from more of a theoretical perspective. What does the scholarship look like? And so you get a little bit of everything, folks that are brand new to, to say hi to, some of those folks like, I remember reading her book, like all of those kind of things where you have really deep scholarship happening, but also translating that theory into practice is occurring. There's nothing like sitting around with colleagues and being able to just have those conversations on the fly. But I also encourage folks to attend because it is the opportunity, like you said, to influence. Like, what is it that folks are needing to have answers to that there aren't quite answers to yet? Community colleges is a great example, right? Not that we don't, look back in the community college history and say, yep, this is really important to our higher ed ecosystem. But at some point along the way, we started to realize, assessment at community colleges is really critically important and maybe not paying too much attention to them. So then that evolves, right? Like, so being at the Assessment Institute gives you an opportunity to say, like, we really want to think about these things as a collective discipline together, help lead the way. So thank you for that.
And I hope that people will come and hear from the keynotes, the plenary particularly. That's always a popular session in that often a president of a college comes to not just present, but also as a part of the plenary itself. And this year we have Dr. Rosalind Clark Artis of Benedict College, which is super exciting. And she is not only a great speaker, but absolutely understands the importance of assessment at her campus and broadly. And so I hope that you'll join not just the sessions themselves, but the plenaries, the perhaps some of the pre-workshops. The pre-institute workshops will be of value and of use to you. But yes, there's so much that you have to come and experience.
Very energizing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a very energizing, and in hearing all the great work that other folks are doing can be inspiring for certain. So I have really enjoyed our conversation, and I always like to ask folks what I love to read. And so, what are you reading these days? Something that you would recommend folks? And it doesn't have to be, I mean, of course, I recommend that they all go read your book,
Please.
but I would like to hear what else is on your radar right now.
It's funny you ask that because there are a number of books that I probably need to get to, but I have found myself right now trying to catch up on all of the readings from that I've missed. I mean, I feel like over these past couple of years, I've read some things, but I don't know that I've actually, I think, digested it in a way that's, I think, could be more beneficial. And so I have really been working to do some of that, going back to assessment updates, going back to some of the articles in the Chronicle, really trying to think through. I think there was a tweet early in the last year that says, something that we have to do and not just write all the time is make sure that we're reading and trying to keep up with where other people are going. And so trying to go back and make sure that I at least have taken stock of what's happened so that we can go forward. Research and Practice and Assessment, their journal as well. Definitely trying to hit up all of the tested and tried and true assessment places, and then we'll see what's next. So who knows, your book, someone's book might be next on the list.
Yeah, excellent. That's nice. And it's a reminder that there was a lot of work that continued that was maybe in progress right before the pandemic began, that then was released and got lost in a lot of noise. That is really important for us to not lose track of. So I like that a lot. Thank you. And so I would like to ask you as well. I've enjoyed my conversation with you tremendously. Thank you for taking the time. If there are listeners who would like to continue the conversation with you, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you?
You absolutely should reach out to us at NILOA, NILOA, at education.illinois.edu. You can find that on our website as well. Again, the website's www.learningoutcomesassessment.org. There's ways to contact us in there. Make sure if you do type in NILOA that it's not the lacrosse organization that often pops up, but instead it's Learning Outcomes Assessment. But yes, please do peruse our website. Think about some of the questions that you have so that when we see you at the Assessment Institute or in some other spaces, right, we can think about the now what and have some really fruitful conversations.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Baker. I really enjoyed my conversation today with Gianina. Dr. Baker is so very knowledgeable about the really deep spaces of assessment, of student learning, especially thinking very carefully about equity and how assessment can impact equity on our campuses. Also, the very important community college space, serving such incredibly important student and stakeholder constituencies. And it was so nice to speak with her about the work, not only the history of NILOA, but also, as she said, the what's next. So important for all of us in the quality assurance space to be thinking about and what's next, and to really be driving that conversation forward for higher education and for our students. I will invite you to make sure and subscribe to the podcast using whatever platform you like to use for listening to the podcast. Or if you are watching on YouTube, please make sure and subscribe. We look forward to our next conversation.